The attackers only have to be right once. Defenders have to be right all the time.
Email has consistently remained one of the biggest threat vectors for businesses. And yet, when it comes to the wider strategy, it's still tagged on the end as kind of an afterthought. To help us unravel growing complexities around email trends and requirements, we're joined today by Brian Westnedge from Redshift.
It's always an arms race. Everything is evolving. It feels like at a very rapid pace right now with AI-generated video in particular, but email address is almost always the login that you use.
Email may appear to be seen as an archaic form of communication, but let's face facts. It still represents the number one form of communication between organizations and customers. And it's vital that given the proper respect as a security threat. Now, with the rapidly increased use of AI and the complexity of attack methods and frequency over the last 12 months, it's become essential for both organizations and end users to not only be vigilant, but structured and organized in how they protect themselves. You're listening to Trusted Talk, and I'm your host, Steve Hall. To help us unravel growing complexities around email trends and requirements, we're joined today by Brian Westnedge from Redshift. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be with you.
So email has consistently remained one of the biggest threat vectors for businesses. And yet, when it comes to the wider strategy, it's still tagged on the end as kind of an afterthought when it could actually become a built-in advantage. Now, so what are the basics that organizations are missing from when it comes to email and communication security?
Yeah, I think, Steve, sometimes email gets taken for granted because it's been around for so long and it's become embedded in our work lives. And I think a lot of times people think, well, somebody in my organization must be looking after our email program. You know, email is not the bright, shiny toy like potentially social media and other forms of communication. But the reality is a lot of companies are missing some of the basics. And for us in the space of GlobalSign and Redshift work in, that's email authentication, specifically SPF, DKIM, and DMARC protocols, which I realize are heavy acronyms, but very important in today's world, not only to stop spoofing and some malicious uses of your domain, but also to ensure your legitimate email gets delivered to the inbox.
So I mean, you just reeled off a whole bunch of acronyms there. Now I know what they are, but most of our listeners probably don't. So maybe if we just take a little kind of step back for a second, and kind of just have a little talk about some of the elements of kind of DMARC, encryption, SPF, for example, and then maybe a little bit about BIMI.
Absolutely. So email was not designed with security in mind. So in today's world, we're essentially bolting on email authentication security to a protocol that's been around for decades. So the first email authentication protocol, the idea being authenticate your legitimate email to prove in some way to a recipient that the mail is genuine. SPF, or Sender Policy Framework, that's been around a couple of decades now. It was followed by DKIM or DKIM, domain keys identified mail. That's a way for the sender of the message to cryptographically sign the message to prove to the recipient that it hasn't been altered in transit. And then finally, DMARC is the modern email authentication protocol, leveraging SPF and DKIM, adding a reporting layer. And then the good news for our viewers is once you implement DMARC at enforcement, you're eligible for something called BIMI, or Brand Indicators for Message Identification. So I like to think of it as the cherry on top, or the top of the pyramid of the email authentication stack.
Thanks, Brian. But that does all sound, I guess, to a third party quite complicated. And I'm guessing that obviously some large organizations will have the resources there to know kind of what to do. They're probably very familiar with that technology and how it's implemented. But what about smaller organizations? I mean, they must struggle, right, with that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think up until a few years ago, a lot of small organizations maybe weren't as aware of protocols like DMARC and BIMI. And really what we saw in the last couple of years in particular is big mailbox providers like Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo all came out with sender requirements to for domain owners to adhere to if they want to get their legitimate mail delivered to the inbox. So I would say email authentication has always been a best practice as long as it's been around, but it was never a formal requirement until a couple of years ago. And now really what's happened is if you want to get your legitimate mail delivered to the inbox, you have to use SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, and that's mandated by big mailbox providers. So even if you're a small business, those standards will apply to you, and you need to make sure that you're educated on these protocols. Again, not only prevent spoofing and illegitimate uses of your domain, but also to ensure that your marketing mail and other business communications make it to the inbox.
Cool, thank you. So why are these standards kind of so crucial now? I mean, especially with the growing threats like AI, how can users reclaim that trust in their inboxes? I mean, I personally, I have several emails I use for signing up for certain stuff, and the number of emails that come in, and it gets complicated, right?
Yeah, I think we all get a lot of email, as you mentioned. We're all very busy. A lot of times we're reading our email on our mobile devices and, skimming our inboxes. So you're right. A lot of us that work in technology sometimes become their family help desk for their extended relatives, especially their parents. So a lot of times I get questions from my parents saying, hey, Brian, is this a legitimate message? Because today, because of these threat and risk factors like artificial intelligence, it's not easy to look at an email and be able to figure out, hey, is this legitimate or not? It used to be you could look at an email and there'd be misspellings or maybe a dodgy attachment or a link to kind of set off your alarm bells. And the reality is in today's world, attackers are using AI. They might be constructing very well-crafted, well-worded messages. Even if the language is not their native language, they can use AI to make it, sound really good, look really good. And really where authentication comes in is to ensure that only legitimate mail is delivered to the inbox. And then, as we're talking about BIMI, adding a visual trust indicator to mail. So when you're looking at a message and you see potentially a company's logo next to the from address or a little tick box to say that the message is verified, that is, kind of an indicator to the end user that this message is okay to open. So for instance, if you go and look at your personal Gmail account, you might see in your list view of messages, you might see some logos from brands that you recognize. And then if you open those messages, you may see their full logo. And again, there's a verified tick box that comes along with implementing BIMI with a verified mark certificate, in that where most of us are used to social verified accounts, where if you're following your favorite person or organization on Instagram or Facebook or X, you'll see a little verified tick box next to their name. BIMI with the VMC is really like that for email, in that right next to the from address, there will be a little tick box. And if you hover over that, it'll say, this logo and domain have been verified as belonging to the company that sent the message. So it really is a visual trust indicator.
And I know you just mentioned, obviously, VMCs or verified mark certificates, but I guess it is important to note there are kind of two kinds of certificate, right? So we've got the verified mark certificates and the common mark certificates. Is it worth just explaining the difference between those two?
Absolutely. So the verified mark certificate requires that the domain owner have a registered trademark for the logo that they are using in the email. And sometimes companies, logos that they use, informally, let's say in email communications, may not be exactly the same as their trademark logo. Maybe their trademark is an image plus the name of the company, and in email communications, they just use the image. So for various reasons, the company may not have a registered trademark for the logo image in email. And in those cases, the common mark certificate or CMC is certainly an option, as long as you can prove that you've been using that image, let's say on a website for the past year. You can obtain a common mark certificate, and you will still get that logo display in Gmail clients next to the from address. So you will still give your email this trust indicator, because all of us, regardless of whether a message is a marketing message or not, we all want the email we send to be opened. And really the CMC is a nice alternative to the VMC if you do not have a registered trademark for that particular logo.
Yeah. And I guess it's really important, isn't it? When we're talking about email security and we're talking about organizations, but I guess it's really easy for people kind of listening in to think, oh, it's just big companies, right? It's the Fortune 500 or just large organizations. But actually, it could be anything like a florist or a baker's or a car garage down the road, right?
Absolutely. I've seen companies, let's say, educational institutions, universities, state and local government organizations, small businesses, a lot of organizations you wouldn't necessarily expect to have implemented this protocol. I mean, BIMI is an open standard. Anybody can publish a BIMI record in DNS, and it is a fairly straightforward protocol. So yes, all of the organizations that we either work for, interact with, send email, all of them want to ensure the email is delivered and opened and read and acted upon. And the CMC is really a way to make BIMI accessible to really anybody, as you mentioned.
But of course, the DMARC part comes first, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. DMARC really is the foundation and the requirement if you want to get that logo display. And that's really because the mailbox providers that support BIMI, Google in particular, Apple, in the US, Comcast, globally, Yahoo, really they want domain owners to authenticate their mail with SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. That is the foundation, if you will. And once you've done that work to authenticate your legitimate mail, then you qualify for BIMI with either a VMC or a CMC. A lot of companies and maybe folks that are in marketing roles are like, wow, VMCs and CMCs, this sounds really interesting. I want to do this. I want to stand out in the inbox. And they may have less control or influence over the DMARC process, and they may need to bring others in the organization into the DMARC project. Folks, in IT and infrastructure and technology, people that manage the corporate mail environment a lot of times need to get involved in the DMARC project. But also the benefit is that a fully implemented DMARC project will pay off for all of those roles. So IT and security will get the benefit of stopping exact domain impersonation once a domain is at full DMARC enforcement. And then the marketing department will get the benefit of the logo display once BIMI with a CMC or a VMC is implemented.
Perfect. Thank you. Where do you think email security is heading in over the next couple of years? And I guess on top of that, what do you think it means for the wider business strategy?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, the threats will be, I think, more targeted, harder to discern. Again, with the advent of AI, I don't see email volume decreasing over time. I think a lot of companies see email as a fairly, inexpensive digital marketing channel relative to other expenditures. So email is still, as much as my kids, hate it and tell me that it's going away, it's not going away, which they will find out once they enter the working world. But I think targeted attacks will still be prevalent. The attackers only have to be right once. Defenders have to be right all the time, right? So I think it's always an arms race. Attackers try new tactics. Defenders try to keep up with those. So we'll kind of have this arms race always of new types of phishing and spoofing campaigns. Defenders preventing those. We will see some new email authentication protocols coming along. So there's a new version of DKIM coming out called DKIM 2, which offers some enhancements over the existing DKIM protocol. There's a new version of DMARC coming on. We're still on version 1.0, and there's a 2.0 version of DMARC, if you will, in the future. And then I think also on the logo display side, we'll see more providers likely adopt BIMI support, and we'll see the benefits of getting a VMC or a CMC increase over time as more mailbox providers adopt it. The elephant in the room is Microsoft. So we expect Microsoft to adopt BIMI. They have not yet. They typically lag the email authentication space. But if I'm not a betting man, but I really would expect Microsoft to start supporting BIMI in the next year or two. Email still is kind of the old standby communication medium. It's the way we log into most of the accounts that we may have with any provider, your bank, obviously your social media accounts, all of your corporate SaaS services that you might use. Your email address is almost always the login that you use. So email is the way to get into organizations. Most organizations are doing a decent job of protecting their infrastructure, and so the attackers are going to go after the soft targets, which are people, and because we're all human, and the way to get access to people is through email.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for that. So before we begin to wrap up here, we have one final question that we always like to end on. And that's what one piece of tech could you not live without? And don't say email.
No, I think it's Apple CarPlay for me. So especially I travel a lot, and I often rent cars in various locations, and often outside of the US where I'm based. So Apple CarPlay and Maps in particular on your car screen, pretty much like if a car doesn't have CarPlay these days, I feel a little bit lost. It's like not having your backup camera in your car that you get so used to. You get used to having it, and you really miss it when you don't have it.
It's funny, isn't it? Could you imagine 15 years ago being able to basically have your phone in your car and just be able to live the same life? So I get it. It's a good one. So look, thanks for joining us today, and also helping us kind of dive into that complex world of email, Brian. But and if any of you have a question about this topic, or if there's another topic you'd like us to discuss on this podcast series, please leave us a comment or get in touch with us at trust.idtalk@globalsign.com. Thanks for listening. This has been Trusted Talk.